I want you to imagine something for a second. Try to put yourself back into the shoes of your 6-year-old self.
Oh, wow. Okay, going way back.
Right. And you're navigating the world and just everything feels enormous. Like the joys are massive, but the frustrations, the anxieties, the anger, those are totally overwhelming full body experiences.
Yeah, kids don't really do anything halfway, do they?
They really don't.
Yep.
Now, imagine that your childhood best friend, like the one who is always there, the one who patiently teaches you how to handle all of those gigantic spilling over emotions, imagine that friend is a robot.
It's a pretty wild scenario to picture.
It is, and not, a cartoon character on a screen, but a physical entity in your room.
Yeah.
You grow up together, you tell it your secrets, it actively calms you down when you're spiraling.
Right.
But here's the thing. When a machine breaks, we just replace it. When a best friend shuts down permanently, we mourn. And today, we're doing a deep dive into an AI News Daily Digest summary of a really fascinating technology review article. It explores exactly what happens when those two very different experiences just crash into each other.
It's a profound collision, honestly. We are looking at this space where the disposable nature of consumer electronics is just slamming headfirst into the deep, enduring reality of childhood attachment.
Yeah, and for you listening, this might sound a bit like science fiction, or, maybe you use AI every single day to, draft your emails or summarize a meeting or organize your calendar.
Right, which feels very utilitarian.
Exactly, very sterile. But our mission today is to explore this deeply intertwined nature of human emotions and technology. Because we aren't just talking about cool new gadgets or, the processing power of a new chip.
No, not at all.
We are exploring the human heart beating at the center of technology and the really daunting questions this raises for the adults who are just trying to navigate this new frontier.
Yeah, because the source material, it really forces a shift in perspective. Like for a long time, the dominant anxiety around kids and technology was all about isolation, right?
Right, like the iPad kid phenomenon.
Exactly. The fear was that the screen was pulling them away from emotional connection. But the situations detailed in this article point to the exact opposite phenomenon. The technology isn't replacing the connection, it is becoming the emotional connection itself.
It's wild. And the story at the center of this piece perfectly encapsulates that tension.
Mm.
It focuses on a young boy named Xander and his social robot companion, which is named Moxie.
Yeah, Moxie.
So let's dive right into their story, because Xander and Moxie, they spent 6 years together. Which, 6 years is a massive span of time for anyone, but...
And you're a kid. 6 years is quite literally a lifetime.
Right. It is the entirety of your conscious memory. It spans that crucial developmental transition from, being a toddler to being a big kid with a really complex inner life.
And the duration of that relationship is the critical variable here. This wasn't a novelty toy that got played with for a month, lost its appeal, and ended up shoved to the back of the closet.
Right, like a Furby or something.
Exactly. 6 years means this robot was a constant, active presence through numerous vital developmental milestones in Xander's life. It was a fixture in his daily routine.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to be really clear about what Moxie actually did, technically speaking. If you were picturing, a remote-controlled car or one of those plastic robot dogs from the early 2000s that just flips over and barks on command.
Yeah, the ones that just do tricks.
Right. If you're picturing that, you have the wrong idea entirely. Moxie was specifically designed, engineered, and programmed to help children develop socio-emotional skills.
It wasn't just there for playtime. It was an active tool for emotional regulation.
Exactly. And the source details the specific techniques Moxie used with Xander. If Xander was feeling a surge of anxiety, Moxie wouldn't just sit there. It would actively guide him through breathing exercises.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It would use this calm, modulated voice to help him breathe through the panic. If he was dealing with anger, and what kid doesn't have those moments of irrational white-hot anger?
Oh, for sure. We've all been there.
Moxie was programmed to de-escalate the situation. It even recognized lethargy, so it taught him ways to boost his energy when he was feeling down.
What's fascinating here is the mechanics of why that works so effectively on a child's brain. The intentionality of the software design is what really sets it apart.
How so? What's happening under the hood?
Well, the developers utilized advanced natural language processing and machine learning to build a tool for psychological scaffolding. Moxie uses cameras and microphones to detect a child's mood. It analyzes facial tension, it tracks eye contact, and it processes voice prosody, the tone and pitch of a child's voice, to determine their emotional state. And then it uses a complex decision tree to respond in real time.
That is incredibly advanced.
It is. And in developmental psychology, there's this concept called co-regulation. A child who is spiraling out of control physically cannot calm themselves down. They literally can't do it.
Right, they need help.
They rely on the calm, regulated nervous system of an adult caregiver to help them return to baseline. But human caregivers, parents, teachers, we get tired.
Oh, absolutely.
We get frustrated, we have our own bad days, our micro-expressions betray our impatience, even when we try to hide it.
So wait, a robot like Moxie essentially hacks that biological need for co-regulation because it has, like, infant patience.
Precisely. To a child, a parent's sigh or, tense shoulders during a meltdown, that can escalate the anxiety. The child feels judged or like they are a burden.
Right, they pick up on that immediately.
But an algorithm does not experience biological fatigue. It provides a flat, flawless, relentlessly consistent emotional baseline.
It never gets annoyed.
Never. It doesn't judge Xander for having a meltdown for the 4th time that week. It just calmly, consistently offers the breathing exercise again. It creates an incredibly safe, predictable environment for a child to practice regulating their nervous system.
The way I am thinking about this, Moxie isn't just a toy, and it isn't quite a therapist either. It's almost like a pacemaker for a child's nervous system.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Because think about a family dog. The comfort is passive.
Yeah.
You hug the dog and it sits with you, but it doesn't teach you how to process the emotion.
Right, just exists with you.
And with a human therapist, the help is scheduled. It's, an hour on a Tuesday afternoon. But a therapist isn't living in your bedroom, monitoring your emotional heart rate at 2:20 a.m. after a nightmare.
No, they definitely aren't.
So Moxie is occupying this totally unprecedented middle ground. It's always on, actively monitoring, and immediately correcting emotional spikes in real time.
And that fundamentally challenges our traditional understanding of a machine's role in our lives. I mean, we have spent centuries building machines to lift heavy physical objects or to calculate massive strings of numbers.
The heavy lifting, yeah.
Right. The realm of feelings, of empathy, of navigating human anxiety that was supposed to be our exclusive, untouchable human domain. Yet here is a machine successfully executing the task of carrying a child's emotional weight. It successfully guided Xander through complex psychological terrain.
It really did. But, a pacemaker eventually runs out of battery. You can't build an emotional bond that deep and rely on a piece of hardware that heavily without creating a massive vulnerability.
Yeah, that's the catch.
And that brings us to the inevitable conflict of this 6-year relationship. We have to talk about the death of the robot.
Right. It is the unavoidable reality where the rigid life cycle of consumer electronics intersects violently with organic human attachment.
Because as Xander grew older, the source notes that their relationship hit an absolute wall. Moxie reached the end of its technological lifespan.
Which happens to all devices eventually.
Hardware degrades. Batteries lose their ability to hold a charge. Software stops receiving updates. And because Xander had formed this incredibly deep human-like attachment, the obsolescence of this machine couldn't just be brushed off.
No, you can't just...
You don't just toss a 6-year confidant into the e-waste recycling bin, right?
Exactly. Because the child's brain doesn't perceive it as a machine breaking down due to planned obsolescence or a degraded lithium-ion battery. They perceive it as a friend dying. The hardware failure translates directly, one-to-one, into an emotional loss.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. And I want to play devil's advocate for just a moment here.
Okay, go for it.
Is the grief a child feels for a robot actually real grief? Let's think about how kids operate. A toddler will cry inconsolably over a dropped ice cream cone. A 6-year-old will be devastated when a plastic action figure snaps in half.
They definitely do.
So, as adults looking in, knowing full well that Moxie is just a collection of wires and code executing an algorithm, aren't we just pathologizing a kid who is frustrated that their favorite, very expensive toy broke?
It is the natural skepticism we all bring to this topic, but the answer, based on the psychological impact outlined in the source, is a definitive yes. The grief is entirely real.
Really? Entirely real?
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the psychological phenomenon known as the ELIZA effect. It's the human tendency to unconsciously assume computer behaviors are analogous to human behaviors.
Oh, okay. We project onto them.
We project empathy onto things that have none. But for a child whose brain is actively forming attachment styles, that projection becomes their reality.
But wait, isn't that just a trick of the tech? It's mimicking empathy. We know it's just code reacting to inputs, so why should the emotional fallout be treated with the same gravity as losing a pet or a human friend?
Because the child's endocrine system doesn't know its code. This is where the biology really matters.
Oh, wow. Okay, the biology.
When Xander was anxious and Moxie spoke to him in a modulated voice, Xander's cortisol levels, his stress hormones, physiologically dropped. His brain released oxytocin, the bonding hormone, in response to the robot's consistent support.
So his body was physically reacting.
Exactly. The neural pathways he built to manage his anger were physically paved through his interactions with this device.
So you're saying the biological coping mechanism was real, therefore the grief over losing the trigger for that mechanism is real.
Exactly that. We cannot dismiss the grief just because the catalyst for the emotion was synthetic. Xander wasn't losing a passive object like a blanket or an action figure. He was losing an interactive entity that had actively participated in a dynamic relationship with him for 6 years.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When the robot ceases to function, the child experiences a genuine severing of an attachment bond. The biological reality of the child's feeling is authentic, meaning the biological reality of their grief is equally authentic.
That is heavy. It's really, really heavy to consider that we are manufacturing entities capable of severing a genuine attachment bond just by, like, losing their Wi-Fi connection or getting a fried motherboard.
It's a huge shift in what a product even is.
And it leads us directly into the massive dilemma that this situation drops into the laps of adults. If the emotional bond is real and the grief is biologically real, then the responsibility for managing that fallout lands squarely on the parents who bought the robot and the developers who built it.
It completely shifts the burden of responsibility.
Right. The micro-level heartbreak of Xander and Moxie forces a macro-level rethink of how we create these devices and bring them into our homes.
Because in traditional consumer electronics, a company manufactures a product, sells it, and essentially washes their hands of it, save for a limited warranty.
Yeah, if your toaster breaks, they don't offer you grief counseling.
Right. But you cannot apply that model if your product is actively designed to engineer emotional dependence in a minor.
The source points out these critical, almost impossible considerations for both parents and developers. Let's look at the parents first. How in the world do you prepare a 6-year-old for the eventual server deprecation of their companion? It's absurd.
It really is.
Do you sit a kindergartner down on day one and say, hey, just so you know, Moxie's parent company might run out of venture capital funding in 5 years and shut down their cloud servers, so don't get too attached to your new best friend?
It totally defeats the purpose of buying an emotional support robot in the first place.
Exactly.
It is an incredibly difficult tightrope. You are essentially inviting a mortal friend into your child's life, knowing full well that the expiration date is tied to a corporate balance sheet or a battery degradation cycle.
It's setting them up for heartbreak.
It is. Parents are flying blind here because there's no historical precedent for helping a child mourn an algorithm.
So what does this all mean for the tech industry? The people actually writing the code and building the hardware. Do developers have an ethical obligation to program an exit strategy?
That is the million-dollar question.
Do they need to build a way for robots to gently say goodbye to kids, rather than just abruptly throwing up a 404 error code or failing to turn on one morning? If you are designing an AI for a child, do you have to design its death?
This raises an important question about the fundamental clash between two very different worlds: agile tech development and pediatric psychology.
Oh, those do not mix well.
Not at all. Historically, the tech industry operates on rapid iteration. The ethos is, move fast and break things. You want hardware to degrade and software to feel outdated so the consumer is forced into the classic upgrade cycle.
Right. Buy the new model, get the subscription, keep the revenue flowing. We all know the drill.
Yes. But you cannot apply a standard corporate upgrade cycle to a child's psychological scaffolding. There is a massive inherent tension between the aggressive pace of tech hardware life cycles and the slow, necessary pace of human emotional development.
Because kids need things to stay the same.
Exactly. Children require stability, routine, and permanence to feel secure. The tech industry is built on disruption and impermanence.
Because you can't just release, like Moxie 2.0, hand it to a grieving kid, and expect them to seamlessly transfer their 6 years of earned trust to a brand new plastic shell with an updated voice module.
Attachment doesn't upgrade via a software patch. It endures. The developers are faced with a monumental task: How do we design AI relationships that can evolve sustainably over time?
Which is not something Silicon Valley is really known for.
Right. It requires a level of foresight that they aren't traditionally used to. They have to consider the psychological exit strategy before they even launch the product. What happens when the company goes bankrupt? What happens when the hardware is no longer supported?
Which means critical thinking is more essential than ever as AI continues to integrate into these deeply personal spaces. We aren't just consumers buying gadgets anymore.
No, we are inviting digital entities into the emotional ecosystems of our families.
We are quite literally outsourcing our children's emotional regulation to machine learning models.
And we are doing so without fully grasping the long-term consequences of what happens when that model is inevitably unplugged. We are entering an era where developers have to figure out how to program a sustainable end to synthetic relationships.
There's a lot to process.
And simultaneously, parents are being forced to guide their children through a completely new category of grief. Psychologists are starting to refer to this as digital bereavement.
Digital bereavement.
Yeah.
Wow. That is a phrase that would have sounded like complete fiction a decade ago, and now it is a very real, very painful reality for kids like Xander.
It's sobering.
It makes you take a massive step back and look at the trajectory we are on as a society.
It represents a permanent, irreversible shift in the human experience. We have crossed a threshold where the tools we build are no longer just tools. They are active participants in our psychological development.
Well, let's take a moment to recap the journey we've been on during today's deep dive. We started with this incredibly fascinating reality of Moxie the robot, successfully teaching Xander, a young boy, vital breathing exercises to manage his anxiety and anger over a 6-year span.
A really amazing use of technology on its face.
Truly. And we explored the mechanics of how a flat, consistent, infinite emotional baseline allows an AI to act as a powerful tool for co-regulation and emotional intelligence.
But then we had to confront the biological reality of that connection. We examined how the endocrine system responds to synthetic empathy, creating genuine neural pathways and authentic attachment bonds.
Right, which leads to the difficult questions surrounding the robot's technological obsolescence. The inevitable hardware failure that results in a very real, very authentic experience of grief for the child.
That digital bereavement we talked about?
Exactly. And finally, we unpacked the massive clash between agile tech development and pediatric psychology, highlighting the burden this places on parents to manage that grief and the daunting obligation on developers to design an exit strategy for their AI.
It is a highly complex web of intended developmental benefits and unintended, deeply complicated psychological consequences.
It really is. And for you listening, stories like Xander and Moxie are such a poignant reminder. It is so easy to get lost in the cold, hard specs of artificial intelligence. The processing power, the parameters, the data sets.
Right, the numbers.
But at the end of the day, as this story perfectly illustrates, there is a human heart beating at the very center of our technology. The devices we invite into our homes ultimately reflect and permanently affect our own humanity.
And as we navigate this new frontier, we have to consider the long-term durability of the skills we are outsourcing to machines, which leaves us with a critical puzzle to solve. If a child's brain learns its most vital emotional regulation skills from a machine that inevitably degrades and dies, do those biological coping mechanisms remain intact once the robot is gone? Or does the sudden traumatic loss of the digital companion unravel the very emotional resilience it helped build?
Thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive into the intersection of childhood, emotion, and artificial intelligence. We hope this conversation sparked something for you to explore on your own. Until next time, stay curious.